They thought silence meant surrender. They thought I'd keep my head down while they mocked me in front of strangers, while they turned my service into a punchline at their polished fundraiser tables. But when the speakers crackled to life and my call sign filled that suffocating ballroom when Revenant 2 echoed off every wall like thunder breaking through their laughter, they finally realized who I really was. Not their quiet disappointment. Not the shadow behind my brother's spotlight. I was the ghost who brought soldiers home through fire, and tonight, they'd learn exactly what that meant. My name is Nora Whitaker, Captain, United States Navy. But tonight, in this crowded ballroom at the Savannah Veterans Foundation fundraiser, I was just Harold's daughter who does something with planes. The chandeliers cast golden light across 200 faces I didn't know, all gathered to honor local veterans, mostly men whose stories had been told so many times they'd crystallized into legend. My dress blues hung in my closet at home. Mother had insisted I wear the navy cocktail dress instead. More appropriate for the setting, she'd said, her tone suggesting my uniform would somehow embarrass them. I nursed my wine and watched my parents work the room like they owned it. Harold never dad. Not anymore. Stood near the bar, his voice booming over the jazz quartet as he regaled a circle of businessmen with his Marine Corps stories from Desert Storm, stories I'd heard 1,000 times, each retelling adding another layer of glory that probably never existed. 23 confirmed, he was saying, tapping his whiskey glass for emphasis. That's what real combat looks like. Not like today's military, all drones and computers. My mother, Diane, glided between conversations in her pearl gray dress, her laugh tinkling like expensive crystal. She had that gift of making everyone feel important while simultaneously establishing her superiority. Tonight, she was in her element, basking in the reflected glow of being a Marine's wife and mother to Eli. Eli. My younger brother held court near the stage, his broad shoulders filling out his tailored suit perfectly. The former quarterback who'd blown out his knee senior year at Georgia Tech, now running what he called a leadership development program for corporate executives. Basically, he made middle managers crawl through mud on weekends and called it training. There she is. His voice cut through my thoughts. My big sister, hiding in the corner as usual. The group around him turned to look a collection of local business owners and their wives, all holding drinks and wearing practiced smiles. I recognized the hunger in their eyes, the same look I'd seen at every family gathering since I'd earned my wings. They wanted war stories, wanted to hear about danger and glory, but from me, they expected nothing. Nora flies for the Navy, Eli announced, his tone suggesting I delivered mail. Desk pilot, basically. Keeps our boys organized from way up high where it's safe. The group chuckled politely. One of the wives, blonde hair, shellacked into submission, touched my arm with manicured fingers. How wonderful that they let women do that now. So progressive. I smiled, the expression automatic after years of practice. Something like that. Not everyone can be frontline, Eli continued, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make me step forward. But hey, someone's got to handle the paperwork. Right, even if it's from 30,000 feet. More laughter. Genuine this time. At my expense. My mother materialized beside us, her timing impeccable as always. Nora's always been our cautious one, she said, sliding her arm through mine like we were close, like she hadn't spent my entire childhood comparing me unfavorably to Eli. We're just grateful she chose something safe. All that combat flying would be far too dangerous for... She paused, letting the implication hang. Well, you understand. For a woman. The blonde wife finished helpfully. I was going to say for a mother's heart, Diane corrected smoothly. But yes, that too. I counted to 10 in my head, a technique I'd learned during survival training. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Although, my mother continued, her voice taking on that false lightness that preceded her worst cuts. Calling it flying might be generous. From what Harold tells me, It's mostly autopilot and computers these days, not like real aviation. More like operating a very expensive bus, Eli added, and the group erupted in genuine laughter. I felt something shift in my chest, a tectonic plate sliding after years of pressure. But I kept smiling, kept standing there in my appropriate dress while they reduced 8 years of service, 2 combat tours, and more close calls than they could imagine to a punchline. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to freshen up." I walked away from their laughter, my heels clicking against the marble floor in perfect military cadence. Behind me, I heard my father's voice joining the conversation, probably launching into another story about real warriors. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, makeup perfect, hairstyled, playing the part of the dutiful daughter at yet another family performance. But beneath the surface, something had finally cracked. They thought silence meant surrender. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The bathroom mirror couldn't reflect the memories, but they came anyway, flooding back like they always did when my family's dismissal cut too deep. I was 12 when Harold first told me women didn't belong in cockpits. He'd been drinking bourbon on the porch, watching thunderheads build over the Georgia coast, and I'd made the mistake of saying I wanted to fly jets like the Blue Angels we'd seen that afternoon. "That's not for you, Nora," he'd said, not even looking at me. "Combat aviation requires a certain constitution. Men are built for it. Women are built for other things." Other things, like standing quietly while he told neighbors about Eli's touchdowns, while I was earning top marks at the Naval Academy, like smiling when he introduced me as Eli's sister to his Marine buddies, even after I'd graduated flight school 3rd in my class. The first time I flew a Super Hornet, pulling 7 Gs in a vertical climb until the world compressed into tunnel vision and my body weight multiplied beyond comprehension, I thought of his words. Women aren't built for it. But I was. I held that climb, pushed through the pressure that tried to drain the blood from my brain, and emerged above the clouds where the sky turned deep purple and I could see the curve of the earth. My instructor's voice had crackled through the comms. "Excellent recovery, Whitaker. You've got ice in your veins." Ice. That's what they called it when you could stay calm while your aircraft bucked and rolled through enemy fire, when you could thread your way through a wall of flak to deliver ordnance on target, when you could keep your voice steady on the radio while surface-to-air missiles locked onto your heat signature. But at home, ice meant something else. It meant cold daughter, unnatural woman, the one who chose machines over marriage. I remembered the day I earned my call sign. We'd been running combat air patrol over Helmand Province. Routine until it wasn't. The radio exploded with panicked voices, a supply convoy hit by IEDs, taking heavy fire, coordinates coming through broken and desperate. Negative on air support. Ground control had said, "Weather's too thick. This is 0. But I could see it in my mind, could calculate the approach through the soup of sand and smoke. "This is Whitaker. I have the coordinates. Request permission to engage. Negative, Lieutenant. RTB immediately. Return to base. Let them die. Ground control. I have 8 souls down there requesting immediate support. I'm going in." I'd dropped through that sandstorm like a ghost. Instruments only, trusting my instincts and training while my wingman screamed warnings in my ear, found them by the muzzle flashes of enemy positions, delivered my payload so close I felt the shockwave rattle my aircraft. "Revenant 2, my CO had said later, pinning new patches to my flight suit. "Because you came back from the dead, and you brought them with you." 8 soldiers went home to their families because I didn't listen to negative. Their letters still sat in my desk drawer at home, unopened in front of my parents but memorized in private. "You saved my life. My kids have a father because of you. I owe you everything." But Harold told his golf buddies I worked in logistics support, made it sound like I scheduled flights from behind a desk. Even when the Navy cross citation came through classified, of course, the details sealed for operational security, he'd barely looked at it. "Lot of medals going around these days," he'd said. "Participation trophies. Mostly. Eli had been worse. Must be nice, getting recognized for flying around in circles while real soldiers do the groundwork. Real soldiers. Like him, playing drill sergeant to insurance salesmen on corporate retreats. Like Harold, whose combat service, while genuine, had become so embellished over the years that even he probably couldn't separate fact from fiction anymore. I thought of my last mission before rotating home. Night operation. Everything black except for the green glow of instruments. Enemy radar installations needed to disappear before dawn, and the approach required threading between mountain peaks in total darkness with anti-aircraft positions waiting for any mistake. Revenant 2, you are cleared hot. Those words, that trust, that responsibility. It was everything my family couldn't see, or wouldn't. My wingman's voice, tight with concentration. 2, I've lost visual. Abort. Negative. Stay on my wing. Follow my lead. We'd made it through. Both installations destroyed, path cleared for the morning's offensive. The battalion commander called it extraordinary flying under impossible conditions. My report called it mission accomplished. My mother called it Nora's little job when explaining why I'd missed Easter dinner. Standing in that fundraiser bathroom, I touched the spot where my wings would sit on my uniform. They were at home because my mother deemed them too masculine for tonight's event, but they were earned in fire and fear, in the space between life and death where gender meant nothing and skill meant everything. Harold's Marine stories from 30 years ago still defined him, but my stories, my service, my blood and sweat in Afghan skies, those were inconveniences to the family narrative. I was supposed to be the quiet one, the supporting character in Eli's show. The door opened, and laughter from the ballroom spilled in. Another toast to real warriors. Probably. I looked at my reflection one more time. The appropriate dress, the acceptable appearance, the dutiful daughter costume I'd worn for too long. They wanted me silent, invisible. A footnote in their story of masculine glory. But I was Revenant too. I came back from everything. And tonight, finally, I was done pretending to be anything less. I returned to find them all seated for dinner, circular tables draped in white linen and centerpieces of miniature American flags. Of course, I'd been placed at the family table, front and center where everyone could see Harold's perfect military family on display. Eli stood as the salad course arrived, raising his glass with practiced showmanship. The room quieted. 200 faces turning toward our table. Before we continue, he began, his voice carrying that false humility he'd perfected. I want to thank you all for supporting our veterans tonight. As someone who's dedicated his life to training the next generation of leaders, I understand the weight of service. I gripped my fork tighter. Dedicated his life. He'd been running his program for 18 months. My father, Eli continued, gesturing to Harold, who sat straighter, basking in the attention, taught me everything about courage under fire. 23 confirmed kills in Desert Storm. A real warrior. Applause rippled through the room. Harold nodded solemnly, as if the weight of his service pressed down on him even now. And that tradition continues, Eli said, his smile widening. Through my leadership program, we're creating warriors in the boardroom, teaching corporate America the lessons learned in combat. Someone had set up a projection screen behind him. Of course, Eli never missed a chance for multimedia glory. I've prepared a little presentation, he announced, clicking a remote, about what real service looks like. The lights dimmed. The first slide showed Harold in his dress blues, young and stern. The next, his unit in Kuwait. Then Eli, mud-smeared and shouting at a group of executives crawling under barbed wire. The room chuckled appreciatively. Now, Eli said, his tone shifting to something I recognized the setup for a punchline. We can't all be warriors. Some people serve in different ways. The next slide hit me like a physical blow. It was security footage from my base's administrative building, showing me walking through the headquarters lobby in my flight suit. But they'd edited it, zoomed in on the desk behind me, added an arrow pointing to a computer with the caption, "Where the real work happens." Laughter erupted. "My sister," Eli announced, gesture toward me as heat crawled up my neck, proving that not all heroes wear combat boots. Some wear sensible flats. The laughter grew. Someone whistled. My mother reached over and patted my hand with false sympathy. "At least you're safe behind the screen. Honey," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "That's what matters." The presentation continued. More photos of Harold, of Eli's training camps, and then somehow they'd gotten this a photo of me at my desk on base. Paperwork spread before me, taken completely out of context from a planning briefing where I'd been calculating fuel requirements for a combat mission. "The dangerous life of a Navy paper pusher," Eli narrated, and the room roared. My knuckles went white around my glass. Across the table, I noticed a few veterans shifting uncomfortably. An older man with a silver star on his lapel wasn't laughing. A woman in army dress uniform stared at Eli with barely concealed disgust. But Eli wasn't done. The coup de grace came next, a video clip from a base newsletter, showing pilots walking to their aircraft, but edited to zoom in on me doing the pre-flight checklist. "Look at that intensity," Eli said in mock seriousness. Checking boxes, the danger, the excitement. Harold laughed loudest of all. "That's my daughter," he called out. "Making sure all the forms are filled out correctly. Someone has to do it," Eli agreed. "We can't all be in the thick of things." "Right. Sis." He turned to me, microphone in hand, offering it like a weapon. "Want to say something about your service?" The room waited. 200 faces, most amused, some uncomfortable, all watching to see how the desk pilot would respond to being publicly humiliated by her own family. I stood slowly, didn't take the microphone. "You're absolutely right, Eli," I said, my voice carrying without amplification, steady as it had been calling in coordinates under fire. "Not everyone can be in the thick of things." I paused. Let them think I was conceding. "Some people," I continued, looking directly at my father, "exaggerate their service until fiction becomes family gospel. Others," I turned to Eli, "play soldier with executives who pay $5,000 to feel tough for a weekend." The laughter stopped. "And then some," I said, my voice dropping to the tone I used when missiles were locked on. "Do their duty without needing applause." Eli's face reddened. "Hey, we're just having fun." "Fun," I repeated. "Yes, it's fun to mock what you don't understand, to diminish what you can't do, to turn someone's service into your punchline because it makes you feel bigger." The microphone squealed feedback from the system. Eli fumbled with it, trying to regain control of his show. "Don't worry. Sis," he managed, forcing his charm back online. "Maybe one day they'll name a printer after you." The laughter that followed was uncertain, uncomfortable, but it was still laughter, still at my expense, still reducing everything I'd done, everything I'd survived, to a joke about office equipment. My mother tugged at my dress. "Sit down," she hissed. "You're making a scene." I looked at her, at Harold's smirk, at Eli's triumphant grin, at the room full of people who would go home tonight thinking I was nothing more than a glorified secretary in a flight suit. Something inside me didn't break, it crystallized, hard and clear as the night I'd flown through a sandstorm to save 8 soldiers who weren't supposed to survive. I sat down, picked up my water glass, and smiled. They wanted a punchline. They were about to become one. The MC was announcing something about messages from overseas units. I knew that system, knew how it worked, knew exactly what was possible. Eli sat down, basking in his moment of triumph, completely unaware that he'd just armed the weapon that would destroy his carefully constructed narrative. The microphone feedback hadn't been random. It had been a signal. My signal. I excused myself from the table, needing air more than oxygen at 30,000 feet. The Savannah night wrapped around me like a wet blanket, thick with humidity and the salt tang of the nearby river. The fundraiser banner above the entrance snapped in the wind. Salute to our heroes. Heroes. The word tasted bitter now, poisoned by my family's performance inside. I walked to the edge of the terrace, where manicured gardens gave way to shadows. The music from inside felt distant, muffled, like radio chatter through static. That familiar feeling crept over me, the same sensation I'd had countless times in the cockpit when everything went quiet before a mission. The calm before engagement. My hands found the terrace railing, gripping it like a stick control. The metal was cool, real, nothing like the suffocating fakeness inside that ballroom. The memories came uninvited but precise, like coordinates burned into my mind. Kandahar, 2:43 local time, the kind of darkness that swallowed light whole. Revenant 2, Dust-Off 37 is hit. Repeat, we are hit. Lost our tail rotor, going down hard. The medevac helicopter had been returning from a casualty evacuation when the RPG found them. 8 souls on board 2 pilots, 2 medics, 4 wounded soldiers they'd just picked up. Copy, Dust-Off. Send your pose. The coordinates came through broken, the pilot fighting to maintain control as his bird spun toward the mountains. I'd been returning from a strike mission. Ordnance expended, just enough fuel to make it back to base. By the book. I should have called it in and RTB'd. Let someone else handle it. But someone else was 20 minutes out. They had maybe 3. Ground control, Revenant 2, diverting for search and rescue. Negative, Revenant. Your Winchester on weapons. Bingo on fuel. Winchester. No ammunition. Bingo. Just enough fuel to land safely. The smart play was to go home. Control. I have eyes on the crash site. Multiple hostiles approaching from the north. I could see the Taliban fighters moving through my night vision. Maybe 40 of them, drawn by the pillar of smoke from the crashed helicopter. The crew had survived the landing. I could see infrared signatures taking defensive positions, but they wouldn't last long. Revenant 2, you are ordered to RTB immediately. Orders, like the orders to be quiet at family dinners, to smile when diminished, to accept my place in their narrative. Unable to comply, I said, pushing the throttle forward. 8 souls on the ground. What followed was the longest 17 minutes of my life. No weapons meant I had to get creative. I came in low, afterburners screaming, using the jet wash to kick up a sandstorm between the Taliban and the crash site. Again and again, each pass-burning fuel I didn't have, the master caution alarm screaming about my depleting reserves. Revenant 2, what the hell are you doing? My wingman called, circling high above. Buying time, I answered, pulling into another dive. The Taliban scattered at first, confused by the unarmed passes. Then they figured it out, started standing their ground, firing up at me with everything they had. Tracers lit the darkness like deadly fireworks. My aircraft shuddered as small arms fire found their marks, warning lights cascading across my instrument panel. Quick reaction force inbound, 5 mics. Ground control finally announced. 5 minutes. I had to keep 40 fighters at bay for 5 more minutes with nothing but an aircraft running on fumes. The last pass. I came in so low I could see their faces in the muzzle flashes. The fuel warning wasn't amber anymore. It had gone red. Critical. Engine flameout imminent. Revenant 2. Say fuel state. Sufficient. I lied, pulling up into the darkness as the first helicopters appeared on the horizon. I made it back to base on momentum and prayer, engines dying just as my wheels touched runway. The crew chief who inspected my aircraft counted over 200 bullet holes. "How the hell did you keep this thing in the air?" he'd asked. Wasn't ready to land. I told him. 8 soldiers went home because I'd decided orders were less important than lives. But tonight, sitting at that table, listening to my family mock my service, I'd followed orders, stayed quiet, played my role. The terrace door opened behind me. Laughter spilled out. Harold's voice cutting through. "She's tough, sure, but she's not combat tough. There's a difference between flying a computer and real warfare. Combat tough. As if courage could be measured by his ancient war stories, retold so many times they'd fossilized into family mythology, as if strength meant what Eli did shouting at soft executives playing Weekend Warrior. They had no idea what combat tough looked like. It looked like flying into hell with empty weapons racks. It looked like calculating fuel consumption while bullets shredded your aircraft. It looked like keeping your voice steady on the radio when everything in you screamed to panic. It looked like sitting silent while your family made you a punchline, because you'd been trained to protect those who couldn't protect themselves even when those people were your own blood, protecting their fragile egos from the truth of who you really were. But I was done protecting them. Inside, the MC's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing the surprise segment. Messages from overseas units. My squadron was still deployed, still flying missions I couldn't talk about. But they knew what happened that night over Kandahar. They knew what Revenant 2 meant. I turned back toward the ballroom, through the windows. I could see my family at their table, still laughing, still believing their own mythology. The silence had protected their pride for years. Tonight, the truth would destroy it. I walked back inside, ready for war. The MC stood at the podium, his voice warm with artificial enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat tonight. Live messages from our deployed units overseas, thanking you for your support. The screen behind him flickered to life, showing the first pre-recorded message from an Army unit in Germany. Standard stuff gratitude, appreciation, the kind of sanitized content approved for public consumption. I moved through the ballroom with purpose, not toward my table but to the control booth tucked discreetly in the corner. The technician inside looked up as I approached, a young guy with eager eyes, probably a volunteer. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I saw the recognition flicker across his face as he took in my bearing, the way I carried myself despite the cocktail dress. Military recognizes military. "You served?" I asked quietly. "Navy." "Information systems tech. 2 deployments." His posture straightened slightly. "You. Aviation?" I glanced at his setup standard streaming configuration. Satellite uplink for the overseas feeds. "You're pulling from the DoD communication network." "Yes, ma'am. Pre-screened messages, all cleared through public affairs." I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "What about unscheduled feeds, emergency priority channels?" His eyes sharpened. "Those would override, but they'd need authentication codes. Authentication codes like these." I pulled out my phone, showing him my military ID and a series of numbers I still carried. Emergency protocols, the kind you memorize and never forget. He studied them, then me. "Your Revenant flight." Not a question. Recognition. "Revenant 2, I said simply. His fingers were already moving across the keyboard. "My brother was at Fob Chapman, Dustoff 37, the bird that went down last year." The world shrunk to just us and the glow of his monitors. "He made it home," the tech continued, not looking away from his screens. "Said a crazy pilot in an F-18 held off half the Taliban with an empty jet. Said they owed their lives to—" He paused, finally meeting my eyes. "To you. Just doing my job." "Yeah." He gestured toward the ballroom, where another sanitized message played. "They know that." I looked through the booth window at my family's table. Harold was checking his phone, probably calculating how many more war stories he could fit in before dessert. Eli was charming a table full of donors, his hands moving as he described some corporate leadership breakthrough. My mother touched up her lipstick, preparing for the next round of social climbing. "No," I said. "They don't." The tech's fingers flew across the keyboard. "The squadron channels are live. Your old unit's probably monitoring. Want me to patch something through? Can you access the award ceremony recordings? The ones from Bagram." His smile was sharp. "Ma'am, I can access anything on the military network. What exactly are we looking for?" "Operation Ghost Line. 3 months ago, there was a ceremony for the Navy Cross presentation." He finished. "Yeah, I remember hearing about that. Some pilot saved an entire patrol under impossible conditions. Classified details. But his fingers paused over the keys. That was you. I nodded. And your family out there doesn't know. They know I fly. They've decided what that means. He pulled up the feed, fingers dancing across controls I recognized from 100 briefing rooms. The full ceremony's classified, but there's a segment that was cleared for squadron distribution. The commendation reading, He stopped, seeing something on his screen. Holy shit. Sorry, ma'am. But your squadron's online right now. They're watching this feed. My heart rate kicked up, combat reflexes engaging. Can you patch them through? I can do better than that? His grin was wicked. I can make it look like a scheduled surprise, part of the program. No one will know it wasn't planned. Through the window, I watched the current message end. The MC returned to the podium, shuffling his cards, preparing for the next segment. Do it, I said. Ma'am, once this goes live, there's no pulling it back. Your family. My family, I said, thinking of 8 soldiers who'd made it home, of nights flying through fire, of every mission they'd reduced to a punchline, is about to meet Revenant 2. He started typing, rapid-fire commands that would change everything. Patching through in 30 seconds. You want to be out there for this. I looked at my table. They were laughing again, probably at another of Eli's stories about making executives cry during leadership breakthroughs. No, I said. I'll watch from here. They've had me as their audience long enough. Time for them to be mine. 15 seconds, he said. Ma'am, my brother. The others from that bird, they tell that story all the time. About the ghost that saved them, the pilot who wouldn't leave them behind. The screen behind the MC flickered, shifting from the DoD logo to something else, a live feed sign blinking in the corner. 5 seconds, the tech said. Time for your family to meet the ghost. I watched Harold look up at the screen, casual interest on his face, completely unaware that his mythology was about to crumble. Feeds live, the tech announced. The screen filled with an image that made my breath catch my squadron's ready room. The camera focused on a metal plaque mounted on the wall. The image was crisp, clear, impossible to misunderstand. Operation Ghostline Pilot Revenant 2 LT, Nora Whitaker. And then, a voice filled the ballroom speakers. Not recorded. Live. This message is for Revenant 2. If you're watching. The room stirred, confused. This wasn't the polished, rehearsed content they expected. Harold's face had gone still. Eli's mouth opened slightly. My mother's hand frozen halfway to her wine glass. They were about to learn what real combat tough looked like. The voice coming through the speakers was gravelly, worn by sand and service. Master Sergeant Torres. I recognized immediately he'd been the senior medic on Dustoff 37. To Revenant 2, still the best damn pilot in the sky. Ma'am, you saved my team. 8 of us are breathing today because you flew into hell with an empty jet and held the line. The ballroom had gone silent. 200 people frozen. Champagne flutes halfway to lips. Forks suspended over dessert plates. Harold's face had drained of color, his eyes fixed on the screen where my name blazed in official military font. Eli's confident smirk crumbled like a sandcastle hit by waves. The camera panned across the ready room, showing other members of my squadron gathered around. Another voice cut in Lieutenant Rodriguez, my former wingman. We're still out here, Revenant 2, still flying your routes. Every pilot in this room knows what you did. We tell the new ones about the night you saved those medics with nothing but jet fuel and balls of steel. Someone in the ballroom gasped. My mother's hand had moved to her throat, her carefully composed face cracking with something between shock and disbelief. The camera focused on a display case, my flight helmet, left behind for the deployment museum, with Revenant 2 painted across the visor. That can't be... Eli's voice, barely a whisper, carried in the silence. But it was. And everyone in that room knew it. I stepped out from the control booth, walking slowly toward the center of the ballroom. Heads turned, following my movement like radar tracking an incoming aircraft. The veterans in the crowd, the real ones, were already standing, one by one, like dominoes falling in reverse. They rose from their seats. The tech had patched my microphone into the system. My voice filled the space, calm and clear, the same tone I used calling in airstrikes. "You said real warriors don't hide behind screens," I said, looking directly at Harold. "You're right, I didn't. I flew through surface-to-air missile fire while you polished 30-year-old stories." Harold's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, the great storyteller had no words. "You said I fly paperwork," I continued, turning to Eli. "That night over Kandahar, my paperwork included 17 combat passes with no ammunition, 206 bullet holes, and 8 lives saved." "How many lives has your leadership program saved?" "Little brother." The screen behind me shifted, showing official footage from my gun camera, the Taliban positions, the crashed helicopter, my aircraft dancing through tracer fire. The classification stamps had been redacted, but the content was clear. "I stayed silent," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "because I thought protecting your pride was part of protecting my family. But you turned my service into a joke, my sacrifice into a punchline." An older veteran with a chest full of ribbons started clapping. Slow, deliberate. Others joined. The sound built like approaching thunder. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Nora, I didn't know." "No," I cut her off. "You didn't want to know. It was easier to diminish what you couldn't understand than to accept that your daughter might be more than decoration at your social events." The screen changed again, the ceremony at Bagram. My commanding officer reading the commendation. "Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitaker, call sign Revenant 2, distinguished herself through extraordinary heroism in aerial combat operations. Despite critical fuel shortage and no offensive weapons capabilities, Lieutenant Commander Whitaker repeatedly engaged superior enemy forces, using her aircraft as both weapon and shield to protect wounded American service members. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of naval aviation and reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Navy." The Navy Cross gleamed on screen, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. Harold sank into his chair like his bones had dissolved. His Marine stories, so carefully cultivated and endlessly retold, suddenly seemed as thin as tissue paper against the weight of verified truth. Eli tried to salvage something, stepping forward with his hands raised. "Nora, we were just joking around." "No," I said, the word sharp enough to cut steel. "Jokes are funny. What you did was cruel, and you did it because you needed to feel bigger by making me smaller." The applause had spread through the entire room now, every veteran standing, saluting. The civilians followed, uncertain but moved by something they couldn't quite name. But I kept my eyes on my family, watching their carefully constructed world collapse. "I saved lives while you played soldier in a gym," I told Eli. "I earned my wings in combat while you earned yours at the country club bar." The tech in the booth had one more surprise. The squadron had prepared something, a banner held up to the camera. "Revenant 2, Guardian Angel of Kandahar," my mother whispered. "Nora," but stopped when she saw my face. There was no forgiveness there. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Harold finally found his voice, weak and uncertain. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" My answer was low, final, cutting through the applause like a missile through clouds. "Because you weren't listening." I turned to the crowd, straightened my spine, and snapped a perfect salute to the veterans who'd stood for me. They returned it as one, a wall of respect that had nothing to do with family names or old stories, and everything to do with verified service. The screen behind me held steady on that plaque Operation Ghost Line pilot, Revenant 2. My call sign echoed through the speakers one more time as the squadron signed off. "Revenant 2, you're always cleared hot in our sky." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. The applause crashed over the ballroom like waves against a seawall, but in the eye of that storm, my family stood frozen. Eli's face had gone from red to white to something resembling ash. He stammered, trying to find purchase on words that wouldn't come. "We were joking. Everyone knows I was just—" His voice died as the MC, recovering from his own shock, approached with a sheet of paper someone had just handed him. His hands trembled slightly as he read, the microphone catching every quaver. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been informed. Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitaker is not only a decorated Navy pilot, but a recipient of the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations during Operation Ghost Line." The words hit the room like ordnance. Navy Cross. The gravity of it settled over the crowd. Everyone who knew anything about military decorations understood what that meant. It wasn't just another medal. It was the kind of honor that defined careers, that separated warriors from everyone else who simply served. Harold's Marine buddies at the adjacent table stared at him with something between pity and contempt. One of them, a grizzled colonel who'd spent the evening nodding along to Harold's war stories, stood and walked past him without a word, stopping in front of me. "Lieutenant Commander," he said formally, then saluted. "Semper Fi might be our motto, but tonight, you've shown us all what always faithful really means." The MC continued reading, his voice gaining strength. "For actions above and beyond the call of duty, disregarding personal safety to protect American service members under heavy enemy fire." Eli tried once more, desperation cracking through his cultivated charm. "Nora, listen, I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean what?" I cut him off, my voice carrying the same authority I used when calling in danger close air support. "Didn't mean to humiliate me, didn't mean to reduce my service to a punchline, or didn't mean to get caught." He stepped toward me, perhaps thinking proximity could salvage something from this wreckage. Why didn't you ever say anything if we'd known what that I was worthy of respect, that my service was real?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I shouldn't have to prove my worth to my own family. I shouldn't have to display my medals like credentials just to avoid being mocked at dinner. The crowd had formed a loose circle around us, witnesses to this very public destruction of the Whitaker family mythology. Camera phones appeared, recording everything. By morning, this would be everywhere: the fake warrior son, the dismissive Marine father, and the daughter they'd tried to diminish who turned out to be the real hero. My mother finally found her voice, high and strained. "This is inappropriate. We should discuss this privately." Privately. I wheeled on her. Like all those private moments when you introduced me as Eli's sister instead of by my rank. Like those private dinners where you suggested I find a nice desk job instead of playing pilot." She recoiled as if slapped. The screen behind us still showed the feed from my squadron, though they'd gone silent, watching this unfold. But their presence was felt my real family, the ones who knew what Revenant 2 meant, standing witness to this moment. Harold struggled to his feet, trying to reclaim some authority. "Nora, you're still my daughter." "No," I said quietly, but everyone heard it. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Whitaker. I'm Revenant 2. I'm the pilot who saved 8 lives with an empty jet. But I haven't been your daughter since you decided I was worth less than your son's football trophies." Someone in the crowd started a slow clap, then another, then dozens, the sound building until it filled the space. But this wasn't the polite applause from before. This was something else: acknowledgement, vindication, respect earned in the hardest possible way. Eli made one last attempt, his voice cracking with something that might have been shame or might have just been embarrassment at being exposed. "We're family. Families joke around. Families support each other," I corrected. "Families celebrate each other's achievements. Families don't tear each other down for entertainment." I turned to address the room, my voice carrying clear and strong. Every person who served knows the weight of silence. We carry things we can't talk about, missions we can't discuss, losses we can't share. But we don't expect that silence to come from our own blood. We don't expect our families to fill that silence with mockery. The veterans in the room stood straighter, many nodding. They knew. They understood. You want to know why I never said anything? I looked back at Harold, at his Marine insignia that he wore like a talisman. Because I thought protecting your ego was more important than defending my honor. I was wrong. The MC cleared his throat, trying to restore some order. Perhaps we should— No, I interrupted. Let them stand there. Let everyone see what it looks like when the truth finally catches up to the narrative. I turned back to my family one last time. You spent years building a story where Eli was the hero and I was the footnote. Tonight, that story ends. Harold's shoulders sagged, the weight of 30 years of exaggerated war stories finally crushing down on him. His Marine buddies had all turned away, their respect evaporated. Eli stood isolated, his leadership program suddenly revealed as the shallow performance it had always been. My mother clutched her pearls, her social standing in ruins. The screen flickered once more, my squadron raising their glasses in a toast. To Revenant 2, they chorused, the ghost who brings them home. So I raised my hand to my temple in a casual salute to the screen, then turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against marble in perfect military cadence. Behind me, the silence was deafening. Revenant 2, someone called out the old veteran with the silver star. Thank you for your service. Your real service. I paused at the door, looking back at the wreckage of my family's mythology, at the truth finally spoken, at the silence finally broken. Just doing my job, I said. Then I walked out, leaving them standing in the ruins of their own making. The night air hit me like freedom itself. Cool, salt-tinged, infinite. I walked across the parking lot, my heels clicking against asphalt, each step taking me further from the wreckage behind me. The sounds of the fundraiser faded, but I could still hear it, that eternal echo of my call sign reverberating through the speakers, through their shock, through the dismantled mythology of the Whitaker family. I stopped at my car, a modest sedan that Harold had once mocked as too practical, no personality, unlike Eli's flashy BMW that screamed compensation. My hands were steady as I reached for the keys. Combat steady. Revenant 2 steady. Behind me, the ballroom doors burst open, spilling light and voices into the darkness. But I didn't turn. I knew those footsteps' expensive heels clicking frantically, trying to catch up to something already gone. Nora, wait. My mother's voice, stripped of its usual composure. I heard Harold's heavier tread, Eli's stuttering jog. They were coming after me, but they were years too late. I opened my car door, finally turning to face them. They stood there in the parking lot lights, Harold in his decorated Marine formal wear that now seemed like costume jewelry, Eli in his $1,000 suit that couldn't buy him real respect, my mother clutching her evening bag like a life preserver. Please, my mother said, mascara running in precise black rivers down her cheeks. We need to talk about this. No, I said simply. We needed to talk about this years ago, when I graduated flight school, when I earned my wings, when I came home from my first deployment. But you were too busy celebrating Eli's participation trophies to notice I was becoming everything Harold claimed to be. Harold stepped forward, his voice gruff, trying to reclaim authority. You should have told us about the Navy Cross, about what my service record, the missions I flew, the lives I saved. I laughed, sharp and cold. You had access to all of it. You just chose not to look. It was easier to mock what you didn't understand than to admit your daughter had surpassed your legacy. Eli remained silent, for once having nothing to say. His entire identity, the golden boy, the leader, the favorite, had crumbled in minutes. He looked smaller now, diminished, like a child caught in a lie too big to explain away. Do you know what revenant means? I asked them, my voice carrying across the parking lot. It means something that returns from the dead. That's what they called me because I came back from missions nobody should survive. But I've been dead to this family for years. The only difference is tonight. Everyone else finally saw it too. A few people had followed us out, watching from the doorway. Veterans, donors, everyone who'd witnessed the spectacular collapse of the Whitaker family facade. Harold noticed them, his face flushing with a shame deeper than any battlefield could inflict. "Those people in there," I continued, "they know my name now. My real name. Not Harold's daughter. Not Eli's sister. Lieutenant Commander Nora Whitaker. Revenant 2. I slid into my driver's seat, started the engine. Through the windshield, I could see them standing there, 3 people who'd shaped my childhood, but had become strangers the moment I chose to fly rather than fit their narrative. My mother made one last attempt. "Where are you going?" "Back to base tomorrow. Back to my real family. The ones who know what it means to have someone 6. The ones who never needed me to prove I was worthy of respect." As I pulled away, my headlights swept across them, illuminating their faces one last time. Harold's collapsed pride, Eli's shattered arrogance, my mother's ruined composure. They stood there in their expensive clothes, their carefully constructed images in ruins, finally understanding the cost of their mockery. The radio crackled to life as I drove not military channels, just civilian FM, but in the static between stations, I could swear I heard it again. Revenant 2, cleared for takeoff. I smiled, genuinely this time, and accelerated into the night. Behind me, the fundraiser continued, but the story had changed. Tomorrow, the local papers would run headlines about the decorated Navy pilot who'd been hiding in plain sight. Social media would explode with cell phone videos of Eli's humiliation, Harold's shame, the family that mocked a war hero at their own table. But tonight, I drove toward the coast, windows down, salt air rushing through the car. The ocean stretched out ahead, vast and dark and honest. No pretense, no performances, just the endless horizon where sky meets sea. Somewhere above, jets from the Naval Air Station traced contrails across the stars, my brothers and sisters in arms, flying night training missions, keeping watch while the world slept. Tomorrow, I'd be back among them, back where call signs meant more than last names, where respect was earned in the air, not inherited at dinner tables. The dashboard clock glowed 11:43 p.m. The fundraiser would run until midnight, my family trapped there in their humiliation, forced to endure the questions, the stares, the weight of truth they'd tried so hard to avoid. But I was already gone, vanished into the night like the ghost I'd always been to them. Revenant 2 had left the building. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned, and it was mine. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment when the truth finally came to light? I'd love to hear your experiences.